So here's a quick tutorial for you for a Purple Galaxy for Art Exploration with Jessica, Kelly, and Lisa's February Color Challenge. To join us for this month's Color Challenge and for the rest of the year, head over to our Facebook group. I'll leave the link down below. Hello, my creative friends. Jessica Sanders here. Welcome to my channel. As I mentioned, the color for the month of February is purple. So I've done a little bit of color exploration and color study in a previous video, so I encourage you to go check that out if you haven't seen that yet. And for my project, if you want to call it that, to just take my exploration further, I decided I would paint a galaxy. I'm using my Mission Gold watercolors and using a variety of types of purples. So I have that really bluey purple and I have a reddish purple, and it really goes nicely together and you create some really pretty color mixes. I'm just starting actually a little different than usual watercolor because I'm starting with the dark and working to the light. And that's just something I enjoy doing. It's kind of backwards in the standard way to do watercolor, but it seems to work really well, especially when you're doing a galaxy. I want to create a really soft feel with this today, so I'm actually also adding in some white gouache to give it a little bit of a different feel than if you're just using the white of the paper. It makes it a little bit more matte, a little bit more soft. I'm also trying to keep a wet edge as I go, so I don't want those edges drying on me. Now, if they do, I can kind of go back over and work over them a little bit once they dry completely. But for the most part, I'm just trying to keep those edges nice and soft. Now, I'm using sort of a circular dancing motion with my brush. You can see it's wiggling around a lot, and that kind of creates those cloud shapes. I don't want a smooth coverage of paint. I want nice and flowing and fluffy. At this point, the entire painting is wet, so I'm basically now working wet and wet. Even though I started wet on dry, now I'm at the point where it's wet on wet. And I'm just going to deepen and darken some of those colors, and I'm also bringing in more of that white gouache to give that milky, cloudy effect. And while that's still wet, I'm going to just splatter in some of that gouache and let it bleed out softly, and I'm also going to use some alcohol drops to get some bokeh shapes in there. Then I let the first layer dry before continuing. Now I really want to deepen and darken the dark colors, and I want to keep the light colors nice and light. But whenever you darken the dark colors, you actually cause the light colors to appear brighter. So that's a great thing to remember, is darker darks and lighter lights. I realize it's a little bit cliche maybe, and maybe you've heard it all before, but I'm constantly saying this to myself when I'm painting because I really love contrast. I especially love contrast of value of darks and lights. And so I want to keep reminding myself as I'm painting that that's what I'm going for. So I'm adding those dark layers all around the edges, just bringing in more paint, and I'm again being mindful that I don't want the edges I'm creating to dry, but I really want to soften them. I only want to create hard edges intentionally, if I possibly can. Now, I don't always succeed, and that's just, the way it is when you're painting. Sometimes you'll end up with lines that you don't expect, and maybe you can work those out, and maybe you can't. And sometimes you just have to accept it's watercolor, and it has a mind of its own, which is one thing that to me is magical. It can do so much, just almost paint itself. And so that's something I always try and keep in mind as well. And just don't get too worried about having everything be perfect, but just have fun and enjoy the process. Now, once my second wash is dry, I'm just going to take my fan brush and some white ink. I'm using Winsor Newton drawing ink, but it could be white watercolor or other kinds of white ink, and I'm making splatters on there. And then I'm just going to take a very tiny brush, like a size 0, and draw on some stars. One thing I like to do is add the ink and then tap it with my finger to sort of smudge it, and it'll really give that glowing effect. And then I'll add a little bit more ink, a drop, back in the middle. So it's going to be really bright in the middle and sort of surrounded by this halo of soft light. And I repeat this for the rest of the stars. Now I tend to add 3 to 5 stars that are like sort of stylized stars to my galaxy. I like the effect it looks, but of course you don't have to add those at all. And another thing that you can do with these is they're great backgrounds for lettering. So if you're a letterer, this is a great thing to write on with your, special stuff. Of course, you would probably need a white opaque ink to do that with, or paint. Okay, so I'm going to finish up these stars now, and then I'm going to remove the tape. Now, I stuck this tape down pretty hard, and I did not put it across my jeans before I put it on the paper, and it did lift my paper up a little bit, but this is my exploration journal, and I'm not that concerned with it. You could also use a heat tool to help sort of loosen that adhesive before you remove the tape, but I always love the reveal. It just looks so amazing. So thank you for joining me. I hope you'll join me and Kellie Chassie and Lisa Hetrick in our Facebook group, where we're sharing lots of tips and tricks and helpful tips for working with different colors each month. And we have such a lively community there, so I would love for you to be part of that. Thank you so much. I will see you very soon.